Hi everybody, my name is Hannah and this is Pepper and Pine, and I have a recipe to share with you today. We are going to be making harira, and it is a Moroccan soup that is typically served during Ramadan. It's super delicious, really filling. It can be served as an appetizer or as part of your main meal. So here I am just removing some of the fat off of these lamb stew pieces. I've got about 1 to 2 pounds, and I'm going to cut them into really small pieces so that it cooks faster, and because I'm serving this for company, I want to make sure that everybody gets some meat. So now it's time to brown my meat. I've got some really fancy olive oil that tastes amazing, and I'm going to put my meat directly into my pot. Now I also have an Instant Pot recipe as well. You can find that down in the description box below. There are a couple of variations for that. Okay, so I'm going to add 3 to 4 chicken wings, and next we're going to work on the onions. Now I've got 4 onions, and this is more than the original recipe called for. You can find more information about that recipe down in the description box below. I am making some modifications to this recipe, and adding extra onions is one of them. Okay, so I'm going to dice them up, and I'm only going to be cooking 2 of them now and 2 of them later. And that's because the first 2 are going to get really soft because that meat's going to take 1 to 2 hours to cook. That means that those onions are going to be really cooked well. And I like a little bit more flavor and bite to my onions, and so I'm going to reserve 2 of them for later. Now it's time to work on the spices, and I'm going to go into my spice cabinet and collect a few things that we're going to need for this. Now I go ahead and mix all of my spices together into a jar, which means that then when you are adding it to the pot, you can add as much as you need, and you might have some left over. Rather than adding a little bit more of cinnamon or a little bit more of cayenne, you can go ahead and just add the whole spice mix together. Okay, so I have taken great liberties on the original recipe. I'm adding garlic powder as well as some onion powder and cayenne pepper. The original recipe calls for paprika, cinnamon, and turmeric, and so I am definitely doing my own little variation on this recipe, and it turned out really, really good in the end. Because there are so many hearty ingredients to this recipe, I feel like it can hold up really well to some really strong spices. All right, we're going to finish that off with some salt and pepper. We're going to be adding some more salt at the end of this recipe. You do want to start with a little bit, but do check the salt content before you serve this soup. It really makes a difference between a good soup and an amazing soup. Okay, so I'm going to let this brown a little bit and just get some of those flavors kind of all mixed together, and then I'm going to add about 4 cups of water. I had that on the stove already warming up so that it wouldn't reduce the temperature of the meat too much. Now you're going to want to bring this back up to a boil and then drop it down to a simmer and let it cook for about 1 to 2 hours until the meat is soft but not 100% done. Okay, so in the meantime, I'm going to cut up 4 tomatoes, and we're going to be putting 2 of them into the pot right now and reserving 2 of them for later. I've got them in some pretty large diced pieces. I'm going to put those 2 aside for towards the end of the whole cooking process, and these 2 I'm going to add right now. Now I really like adding extra tomatoes and onions to my soups because it really kind of beefs them up a little bit and it adds a ton of flavor. All right, so let's move on to the lentils and the garbanzo beans. Now we're not going to add these right away, but I'm going to get these ready. I've got 1.5 cups of lentils and 2 cans of garbanzo beans. I actually prefer using dried garbanzo beans and soaking them the night before and adding them when I cook the meat, but I forgot to do that, so we're using canned instead. I'm also adding a couple of cloves of fresh garlic. This is totally optional. I don't believe the original recipe called for it, but I do like the addition of a little bit of kick to this soup, and that's also why we added some cayenne pepper, which again, the recipe didn't call for. All right, so we're also going to have a handful of cilantro and a handful of flat leaf parsley. We're going to be adding these at the end of the cooking process. In the meantime, I'm going to wash it and coarsely chop it and set it aside so that it is ready to go. We don't want to cook it for too long. We want to keep it that nice bright green color. Okay, so a couple hours later, our chicken and our lamb is done. It needs about another 20 minutes to 30 minutes to really soften up, although the chicken is already done, so that could be removed at this point. But now we want to cook our lentils and our garbanzo beans with a little bit of some tomato paste, which you could technically add earlier on in the whole cooking process, but I went ahead and added it towards the end. With the Instant Pot recipe, we go ahead and add that at the beginning. I'm adding another 2 to 4 cups of water, as well as those 2 onions and 2 tomatoes from earlier on, the cilantro and the parsley. And let me just tell you, it is smelling amazing and it tastes even better. So at this point, since most of the ingredients are done and they're cooked, you don't want to give this too long, maybe another 20 minutes or so. You can add a little bit more water. And at the very end, we're going to add some egg noodles. The original recipe calls for rice, but I found these at a local ethnic market and I thought they'd be a great addition to this soup, and they really were. They taste amazing. I'm adding just a little bit more, and it's just going to take about another 5 to 10 minutes for that pasta to cook all the way through. And at this point, I'm going to check the salt, and it needed just a little bit more. And so that's about it. We're going to just give it a little bit more time for all of those ingredients to come together and soften up and smell and taste amazing. All right, so you can serve this on its own as an appetizer or as part of a main meal. We have done both, and they are both amazing and hearty, delicious, and warming. I hope that you'll give this recipe a try. For the complete recipe as well as my modifications, you can find them on my website at pepperandpine.com. If you want to see what we're eating on a daily basis, you can find me on Instagram at pepperandpine.